Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 Episode 15, an episode filled with highlights and cracks alike. More cracks than highlights, to be honest. As a whole, this episode looked good, although normally I wouldn't make a video about it. The more videos I make, the more I end up repeating myself. To avoid that, I skip more episodes from the second half of a show compared to the first. I did the same thing with Chainsaw Man. As such, this isn't just an animation breakdown, it's also a commentary on this production as a whole, especially the more recent episodes. Make sure to subscribe. So, this arc has looked inconsistent so far. While episodes 7, 9 and 13 looked amazing, episodes 8, 12 and 14 looked quite rough. Even the good-looking episodes, all of them without exception, had issues. Episode 14 in particular was filled with problems. The animation completely fell apart. Even the compositing and art direction, two departments which remained consistent up until this point, gave up. Some of the most talented people in the entire industry work on Jujutsu Kaisen, which makes the crumbling visuals even more unfortunate. The episode director's tweets were depressing. You have these incredibly talented artists who are unable to realize their ideas because of how bad the deadlines are. Episode 14 wasn't the first, and it most definitely wouldn't be the last. I don't think they'll delay this show, meaning the remaining episodes will continue to suffer. And that cheerful preamble brings us to episode 15, which needed 5 different episode directors and 5 assistant episode directors, which is concerning to say the least. This episode had a lot of action, and the action storyboards were quite well done. The cuts flowed well, made sense, and were perfectly dynamic. I believe Ista Meister storyboarded the fight, and he did an amazing job. Really love the effects animation here, although this sequence did have some rough looking drawings. Not a fan of how unnaturally still Toji's hair is. Also, at this point, they've stopped trying to polish the non-close-up shots. Even the close-ups have their issues. You can see the drawings jump around a bit. It's not too significant, most people won't even notice something like that, but it's there. This episode had so many rough moments. Fushiguro's jaw moves when he talks, but the streak of water doesn't. Again, most people won't notice this stuff, but the fact that these issues exist says a lot about this production. The non-close-ups had a general lack of polish throughout this episode, and a lot of cuts had a certain amount of melt/jankiness to them. Also, not a fan of the art direction around this section. The backgrounds look off-putting. They don't look like they belong there, if that makes any sense. The haphazard mess of colors with the heightened saturation looks jarring. Back to the positives, love the smeared background animation here. This scene is very well animated and storyboarded. The trees are far away from the curse, but the camera zips through. Also, the smears were very well incorporated. The cut felt smooth. This entire sequence was animated by Nothing Yukun, a new promising animator. His works in episode 11 and 13 were amazing as well. The camera keeps moving outwards towards Toji, which makes the scene feel dynamic. The effects here look gorgeous. There are so many individual shapes of water, and each one of them have 2 different layers of shading. Very Hayato Kurosaki-like. I really love
the concept
behind these cuts. They manage to show a fast bit of action without relying on slow motion shots. Even the execution is quite well done. Unfortunately, the ghosting made it hard to follow. There is a tiny bit of jankiness here, but I've gotten used to it at this point. It's inevitable. And that brings us to the animation highlight of this episode, Keiichiro Watanabe's sequence. That's right, main animator Keiichiro Watanabe is back, and he's as strong as ever. The most impressive thing about this sequence, or any Watanabe cut for that matter, is the amount of movement. When Watanabe animates, everything moves. The characters, their bodies, outfits and hair, the effects, the background, everything. Also, his sense of timing is immaculate. His scenes, especially the more recent ones, rely a lot on quick cuts, but they don't feel like a shortcut. Quite the opposite. The cuts add to the overall flow. The energy keeps increasing with every cut. This sequence started off with the classic Watanabe effects, followed by the heavily smeared style of animation. These go beyond regular smears. Watanabe is playing with the entire character model here. Look at how far back Toji's hand bends. Should it bend that far back? No, but it adds to the motion. animation. Also, lovely perspective here. Look how tiny his legs are compared to his head. This is because his head is closer to the camera. Everything flows so well. Some people don't like this intentionally floaty style of animation, but I do. It's so unique. The amount of movement genuinely blows my mind. Love this close-up. Very well drawn. Toji looks intimidating. Of course, that alone wasn't complicated enough, so he drew two different cells of smooth-looking effects. Also, really love this convex fisheye background. This is indeed a Goshizono project. Again, look how heavily distorted the drawings are. Watanabe stretches the character models to their limits. It looks like Toji is made of rubber, and just to reiterate, that's not a bad thing. It adds to the flow. The storyboards are really good as well. Of course, Watanabe most likely modified them himself. Most veteran action animators do that. Mind-blowing stuff. This is why Watanabe, despite being a main animator, has rarely shown up. His works have a large keyframe count and naturally take a long time. This entire fight had multiple cool concepts. The storyboards were ambitious. Characters effectively hitting the camera, fisheye effects on the background, and shots filmed from under the ocean pointing up. Creative shots galore. The fight did have a few limited cuts, but that's not really an issue. Not every cut needs to be quote-unquote Sakuga. Also, the fight featured some good-looking liquid animation. Of course, some cuts still looked awkward. The large-scale liquid-heavy scenes and some bits of movement felt stiff, and some of the cuts melted. I loved this bit here. It's such a cool visual. Great way of portraying speed without expending your animation strength. Also, Toji kicked him so hard his face grew an extra layer of shading. We get a couple of Kagenashi shots which looked quite good. The final bit of action was solid. Loved the pose/character arc. It's very energetic. Also, the fabric animation is amazing. It actually obeys the laws of gravity, which is rare. It falls backwards and puffs up depending on the motion. The actual attacks are badly dimmed and ghosted, which is a shame. And that marks the end of the fight. It had a lot of cool concepts and ideas, but the execution as a whole was lacking. A general lack of polish was noticeable, occasionally jarring. This cut is a perfect example of the drawing inconsistencies that plagued this episode. Look how badly Toji's model melts here. Look how janky the frames are. The weird shifting and the large jumps look really off-putting. This is an extreme example of an issue that's present throughout this episode. Although the fire animation looks really good, especially the last two cuts. The motion is really smooth. As you'd expect, this episode had quite a few weak drawings. This one, for example. Compare this to the next cut and you'll see the difference, even though these two cuts aren't that different in terms of camera proximity. Here's another relatively insignificant issue. They didn't animate Jogo moving his body upwards. It's a single drawing being dragged up. I like the 3D background work here. Also, some of these close-ups are quite well drawn, surprisingly so. Although the wide shots still look weak and tend to melt. Like, this is not a good drawing. These drawings look amazing though. The perspective is quite complicated and the drawing quality is very high. Also, the shots being Kagenashi is an added bonus. The storyboard work here is really good. The quick first-person cut followed by the well-timed slow-motion shot worked well. Although I do feel like Sukuna's introduction could have been better, direction-wise. It felt a bit basic at times, with the generic parallel editing. It could have been a bit more creative, but that's probably too much to ask from a broken production like this one. With that many episode directors involved, it's only natural. And that just about does it. A good episode overall, but one riddled with issues. Broken, unfinished animation, a lot of melt, weak drawings, fragmented direction. This episode was far from perfect. But hey, Keiichiro Watanabe. The next episode will probably be the best looking one so far. It's that episode if you know what I mean. I hope it looks consistent. That's about it. Did you like this video? Check out this other bit of content on screen if you did. Make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time.